You know the photograph. A couch in a New York apartment that was really a soundstage in Hollywood. He is exasperated. She is about to explain herself. 44 million Americans are watching, which is more than watched the president get sworn in that same week. That was the marriage America bought. It was not the marriage they had. They eloped in 1940 with a ring from a five and dime because the jewelers were closed. She filed for divorce in 1944 and canceled it the night before it became final. He was drinking and unfaithful, and he put both in writing himself. And the woman playing the wife would end up owning the studio, the lot that had thrown her out, and every frame of the marriage you think you remember. It started at a dime store in Greenwich, Connecticut. November 30th, 1940, Byram River Beagle Club, Greenwich. A justice of the peace, no family, no guests worth listing. He was 23, she was 29, though the studio biography said otherwise. He had no ring. Everything was shut, so he bought a brass one at a Woolworth's on the way. She wore it for years afterward, long after she could have bought any ring in California. Hold on to that detail. It comes back. They had known each other 6 months. They met that summer on the RKO lot during a picture called Too Many Girls, and the publicity department wrote it up as a thunderbolt. What it left out is what each of them had already survived. Start with her, because the myth has her as a natural. She was born in Jamestown, New York, in 1911. Her father died of typhoid when she was 3, and her mother was pregnant with her brother at the funeral. She remembered the day in fragments for the rest of her life. A bird trapped in the house. A picture falling off the wall. Then, when she was in her mid-teens, her grandfather handed a rifle to a neighbor boy in the yard. A girl named Joanne Ottinger was hit and paralyzed. The family was sued, the family lost, and the house went with it. Her grandfather never really recovered. Neither, in a specific way, did she. She went to New York to study acting. The school wrote to her mother that she was wasting her money. She stayed anyway, modeled under an invented name, and got picked out of a lineup in 1933 for a Hollywood chorus. Here's the thing nobody says about Lucille Ball in 1940. 7 years in Hollywood, and she had not made it. RKO kept her under contract and put her wherever a body was needed. The trade called her Queen of the Bees, and it was not affectionate. That is the woman who married Desi Arnaz. Not a star, a professional who had been told no for a decade and kept showing up. Now him. Desiderio Arnaz was born in Santiago de Cuba in 1917. His father was mayor of the city. The family had houses, land, boats, staff. In 1933, the government fell, his father was jailed, and everything was taken. They reached Miami with nothing. His first job in America at 16 was cleaning bird cages. Set those two childhoods side by side for a second. Both of them had a house taken away in adolescence. Both of them spent the rest of their lives building something that could not be taken. She did it by owning film. He did it by never quite trusting that any of it was real. I think that difference is the whole marriage, and it shows up within 4 years. They bought a ranch almost immediately. 5 acres in Chatsworth, out in the San Fernando Valley, an hour from the studio. Orange trees, chickens, a pool they added later. She planted things, and she talked about it in interviews for the rest of her life. They named the place by cutting their two names together. Desilu. Stop on that, because it matters later. The company that would eventually own a television empire and buy a movie studio was named after a house in the valley. The name came first. It was a house before it was a corporation, and the house is the part that did not work. Because for most of the 1940s, this marriage barely happened. She was under contract in Los Angeles, on a soundstage, 6 days a week. He was leading a band, and a band works where the bookings are, which meant the road, and the road meant months. Then the war came, and he was drafted, and a knee injury kept him out of combat, and in California, running entertainment for hospitalized soldiers. Close, but not home. She said later that in the early years the time under the same roof came to under 3 months a year. The figure moves depending on the interview, and she rounded things for effect, so treat it as a mood rather than an audit. The shape is not in dispute. They were married, and they were not together. There is something else about that decade that gets left out of the anniversary pieces, and I think it is the saddest fact in the story. They wanted children and could not have them. 11 years. She had at least one pregnancy in the 1940s that did not survive, and it was reported at the time. Then in 1951, at 40, she had a daughter. In 1953, she had a son. Look at those dates against the other dates. The children arrived at exactly the moment the marriage became a television show. For 11 years, when it was only 2 people and a ranch, nothing. The family started when the cameras did. I do not think that is a coincidence in any medical sense. I think it is a coincidence that tells you what finally made these 2 people occupy the same rooms. And he was not spending the earlier nights alone. This is where most tellings of this story get coy, so let me be direct about the sourcing. We are not relying on gossip columnists. Desi Arnaz published a memoir in 1976 called A Book, and in it he admitted the drinking and admitted the women. A man confessing to his own adultery in print is about as clean as evidence gets in Hollywood history, and it means we can skip the usual argument about whether it happened. What we can argue about is what she knew and when, and there the record goes quiet, because she almost never discussed it directly. By 1944, she had stopped waiting to find out. She filed for divorce in September and got what California called an interlocutory decree, a judgment with a 1-year fuse on it. The marriage would end automatically unless something changed. Something changed. They spent the night together before it went final, and under California law at the time, that reconciliation canceled the decree. Read that again, because it is the pattern of the next 16 years in miniature. She goes all the way to the courthouse. He gets her back at the last possible hour. Nothing underneath is repaired. The paperwork is simply undone. They did it again in 1960, and that time, the paperwork held. So how do you save a marriage where the 2 people are never in the same city? You put them in the same show. And this is where a private problem turns into one of the strangest business decisions in television. By 1950, she had a hit radio comedy called My Favorite Husband, and CBS wanted it on television. She said yes on one condition: her husband plays the husband. CBS said no. The reasoning is worth stating plainly, because it gets softened in retellings. The network did not believe American audiences would accept a Cuban bandleader as the husband of an all-American redhead. Sponsors were nervous. Executives said it out loud in meetings. So they went and proved it. In the summer of 1950, they built a vaudeville act and took it on the road. He played the bandleader. She came out of the audience as a hopeless amateur trying to get into his act, in a battered clown outfit, carrying a cello. That routine is the entire premise of the television show, worked out on stages in Chicago and Milwaukee a year before CBS agreed to anything. The audiences that were supposed to reject him did not. They came back with receipts. CBS gave in, and then the second fight started, and the second fight is the one that made them rich. The network wanted the show broadcast live from New York, the way television worked then. She was pregnant, they had the ranch, and neither of them wanted to move. Filming in Los Angeles on 35mm meant real cameras, real film stock, real costs, and CBS did not want to pay the difference. So Arnaz offered a trade. The 2 of them would take a cut in their weekly salary to cover the extra expense. In return, they would own the film. CBS agreed. Nobody at the network thought the film was worth anything. Television was live, and then it was gone. Be careful with this one, because the deal has been retold so often that the numbers have drifted. You will see the weekly cut quoted at $1,000, and you will see other figures, and the original terms are not something you can pull off a shelf. The substance is not in doubt. They traded income for the negatives, and CBS let them, because nobody there could imagine a person watching an episode twice. Watch what that decision does over the next 70 years. They set up their own company to hold it and gave it the name of the ranch. They hired Karl Freund, a German cinematographer who had shot Metropolis and Dracula, to solve the problem of filming a live audience with 3 cameras at once. Freund worked it out. That 3-camera setup in front of a studio audience is still how sitcoms are made. I Love Lucy went on the air in October 1951. Within a year, it was the most watched program in the country. And then, in the summer of 1952, they found out what they actually owned. She was pregnant and could not work, so there were no new episodes to make. CBS filled the empty weeks by running old ones again. In 1952, that was close to an experiment. Nobody knew whether an audience would sit still for a comedy it had already seen once. The audience sat still. The numbers held. That summer is where the rerun becomes a business instead of an accident. And the two people who found out first were the two people who owned the film. Now look at what the country was actually watching. The Ricardos lived in a small apartment on East 68th Street. He worked at a nightclub. She wanted to be in the act and he would not let her. And every week she schemed her way in, and every week it collapsed. The joke of the show was a wife trying to get into her husband's business. The woman playing that wife owned the company that made the show. That gap is not incidental. It is the reason this story is worth half an hour. America spent 6 years laughing at a housewife who could not get a foot in the door, performed by a woman who had already bought the building, and she did it with her body at 40. Into the vat of grapes, under the conveyor belt, drunk on a health tonic that was mostly alcohol, all of it live, 3 cameras running, nowhere to hide a mistake. Nobody in that audience knew she was the boss. They knew she would fall over for them, and the show kept eating the marriage and turning it into product. She got pregnant in 1952, and the network's first instinct was to hide it. CBS would not allow the word pregnant on air, so the script said expecting. A priest, a minister, and a rabbi were brought in to read the episodes before they were shot, which tells you how nervous everyone was. The birth episode was scheduled for January 19th, 1953. She was booked for a cesarean, and the delivery was scheduled around the broadcast. Their son was born that morning. The fictional son was born that night. Something in the neighborhood of 44 million people watched, and the presidential inauguration the following day drew a smaller audience. Ratings measurement in 1953 was not what it is now, and those numbers get repeated more confidently than they deserve. But the ranking held up in the press at the time, and nobody involved ever disputed it. Stop on that for a second. Her labor was calendared to match a script. You can read that as a couple in complete command of their own myth. You can also read it as the moment the marriage stopped being a private thing that happened to be filmed and became a film thing that happened to be private. Both readings hold. I lean toward the second, and so, based on how he wrote about it later, did he? 8 months after that broadcast, the whole machine nearly went off a cliff. In 1936, at 24, Lucille Ball had registered to vote as a communist. Her grandfather was a lifelong socialist, the same grandfather from the shooting, and she said she did it to please him. The problem was that the paper trail did not stop at a voter card. Documents from the same period put her name to party business she said she never acted on, including a slot on a state committee. She always maintained she had attended nothing, and signed whatever her grandfather put in front of her. In the Hollywood of 1953, none of that was necessarily going to save her. Keep the grandfather in mind here. The old man from the rifle in the yard, the one whose accident took the family house, is about to be the most dangerous person in her life, and he did it by being sentimental about politics in 1936. The House Un-American Activities Committee had the file. Their investigator, William Wheeler, took her testimony privately in September. She was cleared, and then Walter Winchell went on the radio with a blind item about the country's top comedian and a red card, and everybody decoded it inside an hour. The next day, it was in the papers with her name on it. The next few days are the tensest of her professional life, and what saved her was not the studio and not the network. They held a press conference at the ranch, and Arnaz ran it. He handed the reporters the committee's own findings. Then, the following night, before the cameras rolled on the next episode, he went out to warm up the studio audience and told them the only thing read about his wife was her hair, and even that was not legitimate. The room laughed, and the story died. The audience turned up. The sponsor stayed. It is a great anecdote, and it is true, and I would just point out what it is actually a picture of. In the worst week of her professional life, the person standing between her and the blacklist was the husband who had been humiliating her privately for a decade. That is not a contradiction to be resolved. That is what the marriage was. 1957 is the year the arithmetic of this story becomes impossible to miss. Desi bought RKO, the whole studio, both lots, for a bit over $6 million. RKO was the company that had kept her under contract through the 1930s and 40s, put her in pictures that did not matter, called her Queen of the Bees, and let her go. 17 years after deciding she would never be a star, she and her husband bought the place. She had a dressing room there once. Now she had the deed. Count the distance between those two sentences. 17 years. That same year, I Love Lucy ended its run in its original weekly form and moved to occasional hour-long specials. And this is where the story turns. Watch the company start to eat the man who built it. Desi, after RKO, was not a family firm making one comedy. 2 lots, dozens of stages, a slate of shows to keep filled. He was running all of it, still performing, still producing, and still, by his own account and everyone else's, drinking. People who worked there described the same progression from different angles. The hours got longer, the decisions got worse. He was hospitalized more than once. Meanwhile, the scandal press was on it. Confidential magazine in particular put his private life on newsstands, and Confidential was a scandal sheet that lost lawsuits and folded under legal pressure, so anything it printed needs a wide margin. But the behavior it was reporting is the behavior he confessed to himself 20 years later, which is an unusual position to be in. The unreliable source and the first-person source agree. What they made last together was an hour-long episode shot in the spring of 1960, with Ernie Kovacs about a wife who suspects her husband of running around. Both of them said afterward that they could barely get through the day. It has been repeated for decades that the last day of filming was his 43rd birthday, and that she filed the next morning. Hold that loosely. It is exactly the kind of detail that gets tidied in retelling. What is on the record is that she filed in March 1960, and it was final in May 1960. She testified about mental cruelty and drinking. He contested none of it. Here is where the story most people know stops, and here is where the actual story starts. 2 years after the divorce, in 1962, she bought him out, around $3 million for his shares in Desi, and with that she became president of the company. She was the first woman to run a major television studio in the United States. Put those two transactions next to each other. In 1950, she built a company to keep her husband in the same city as her. In 1962, she bought his half of it and ran it without him. 5 years in the chair, and she hated most of it. A performer stuck in a job of budgets, network negotiations, and firing people. She kept working in front of the camera the whole time she ran the place, which is either admirable or a sign she never wanted the desk. Under her, Desi put 2 shows into production that the company could not really afford: Star Trek and Mission Impossible. The story online is that she personally saved Star Trek against her board. Hold that loosely. Herbert Solow ran production there and sat in the meetings, and he spent years pushing back on the tidy version. What Solow never disputed is that the money came out of her company at a moment when a failure that size could have sunk it, and she signed off. In 1967, she sold Desi to Gulf and Western for around $17 million. The lot became Paramount. It is still there. 17 years earlier, a network had told her the country would not accept her husband on television. She had just sold the country, the whole studio. Every other witness in this story had a book, a lawsuit, or a career writing on the version they told. The children did not. Lucy was born in 1951, and her brother in 1953. Neither of them remembers a house without a camera crew in it, and neither remembers their parents married and calm at the same time. They were 7 and 9 at the divorce. Both have talked about it as adults, and what comes through is not drama. It is quiet. Then watch what the daughter did with it. In 1993, 7 years after her father died, and 4 after her mother, Lucy Arnaz produced a documentary about the two of them, built from the family's own home movies and their own recorded voices. She had the tapes because they were hers. It won an Emmy. Think about the shape of that. The parents spent 9 years turning their marriage into a filmed product owned by a company they controlled. The daughter inherited the reels, the fictional ones, and the real ones, and made the version with the arguments in it. Nobody outside that family ever made the definitive film about that marriage. They kept it in the house. He never really recovered. Arnaz remarried in 1963, moved to Del Mar near the racetrack, and mostly stayed there. He produced a little. He drank. In 1976, he published a book, a strange piece of work, funny, evasive in places, then abruptly honest about the drinking and the women in a way memoirs of that era were not. He sent her a copy. She kept it. There is a scene from near the end, told by Lucy, who was in the room, so it reaches us from someone who loved both of them. He was dying of lung cancer in late 1986. She held the telephone to her father's ear, and her mother said she loved him. He died on December 2nd. Lucille Ball died in April 1989, 3 years after him. Now go back to the couch. Two people in a New York apartment that was a soundstage in California. A wife who wants into her husband's business and cannot get in. A husband who says no every week for 6 years in front of 44 million people and gets a laugh every time. Watch what the woman playing that wife actually did. She forced the casting when the network said the country would not accept him. She took a pay cut to own the film when nobody thought film was worth keeping. She bought the studio that had dismissed her, then bought his half of the company and sold the whole thing for $17 million. And because of a contract nobody at CBS thought mattered in 1951, she owned the negatives, every rerun for 70 years, every syndication cycle. The marriage that America still pictures when it thinks about Lucille Ball is a scripted one, filmed on stock she paid for and controlled. Desi Arnaz invented how the show was made, and everybody in television still uses it. He wrote his side down in one book and let it go. Lucille Ball owned the footage. He got the credit for the format. She got the film. And the version of that marriage the world has watched 10,000 times is the version she held the negative to, still wearing a brass ring from a Woolworth's in Greenwich, Connecticut.